Michael Munson, and I'm happy that folks are here tonight and that we're going to have a conversation about COVID and pods and how we're organizing our lives with the people that are in it and how we're coping with the world. So we're going to probably drift around a lot of different spaces, but let me just remind folks of our typical format. So right now we're in kind of like a presentation only mode. So those of you who are have joined us won't be able to start your video yet and won't be able to unmute yourself yet. So we can do that later at the end of the evening if we all feel like doing that. We normally start out with an opening question, and we'll do that tonight. And then Shelley and Caleb and I are going to have kind of a conversation about pods, and we'll then wrap up with a closing question, and we'll all head out. So that's our basic agenda. Like many of you might have heard, if you'd like to pin our interpreter, you can pin them to wherever you'd like on your screen so that you can always see them, and you can adjust your view however you'd like as well. You should be able to drag people to the position that you'd like them in now, which is kind of cool. We are recording right now so that we can hopefully have this as a conversation other people can listen to. If that influences how you want to participate, just know that we're recording and we can edit out anything that that you may need or want to do, including all of us who are talking right now. So we might need to edit something out if we say something something silly. So I'm wondering if folks can find the chat area, and why don't we respond to the question of what is one way that you're staying connected to people during COVID? So how are you staying connected to people during COVID? Netflix parties, yep. Facebook Messenger. Mm-hmm. Zoom. Mm-hmm. Walking. Mm-hmm. Discord server with friends. Yep. Virtual support groups of all kinds. Yeah. Great. That's kind of what I expected people would say, but those are many different ways that we can stay connected. So we're gonna have a conversation about how that might look for some of us. I love that Discord is coming up because it's something that I don't know very much about, and that might be an interesting thing to kind of explore as we move on. So why don't we get started talking about COVID and pods? And I'm wondering, Caleb and Shelley, if you would like to introduce yourself in whatever way you want, and then we can start having some chat about COVID and pods. Don't be shy, okay. People.
Well, I was going to let Caleb go first because he's alphabetically ahead of me, but I can go. So I'm Shelley Gregory. I use they, them pronouns, or any pronoun is fine. And I work with Forge. And I'm sorry, was there a question, Michael?
No, just tell us who you are. You just
okay.
I mean, that's enough if that's where you want to end.
That's who I am. I don't like milk. That's my fact for today.
That's great to know. We will not have milk with cookies then at a staff meeting.
Excellent.
Good.
Excellent.
Hey, Caleb, who are you?
I'm Caleb. I use he, him pronouns. I also work for Forge, and I'm zooming in from Portland, Oregon today. Maybe not where everybody else is located right now. Yeah.
Cool. And I'm Michael Munson, also with Forge. So we were kind of doing a Forge staff presentation today, and Laurie is sitting there and is going to respond to chat messages, which is great. So we had a conversation similar to this a few months ago, so maybe 3 or 4 months ago, and the world has changed a little bit, and we have a little bit of a different configuration of who's here tonight. So I'd love to just start out by, do you have a pod? What does your pod look like? Who's in it? How did you make decisions? All of those kind of questions that kind of go into what a pod might be. And maybe we could all define what pods mean to us, because some folks may not have that language to describe what they might be doing. Don't jump at it, people. Okay, Shelley, go for it.
Maybe you should call on one of us.
Okay, I'll start with what a pod is to me. So, and then you all can jump in. So for me, I like the word pod. It's kind of a fun thing it's a word that I hadn't used before COVID very much. And it literally means to me kind of, like a little pea pod of like, who is in my inner circle of who I'm willing to see face to face, basically without a mask, that we've had conversations about what our safety is. So that becomes a pod. And we could talk later about if we have more than one pod, because I think that I've started to develop different ideas around kind of my main pod and then who else is in some other circles that I have contact with. So Shelley, what does pod mean to you? And do you have one? And what does that look like?
Yeah, I think I would probably describe my idea of pod similarly to you, Michael. And so yes, I have a pod, and my pod has changed as COVID has, well, as we've learned more about COVID, and also as time has gone on, because I think some things that seemed tenable or acceptable early on, I think I'll speak for myself. My needs changed, and I think the needs of the people around me changed as time went on, and that kind of has had its effect on people. So my pod has gone from being really small, and really it was just like one partner, to kind of growing into having overlapping pods. I don't have a lot of direct contact with people. I have two partners, and they're in my pod. And then they have some pods that they're a part of. And so in that way, I can't decide how to describe it. It's not really subpods, and it's not really a Venn diagram. It's pods that are kind of linked in some way, almost like a chain link. And then in that way, I think we all consider ourselves to be part of a much larger pod. And so the thing that's been very interesting about this is communication, which I can talk about later. And how all of the people in these overlapping pods are able to communicate and feel some sense of assurance that we are all kind of doing what we agreed to do, or when there are exceptions, making sure that gets communicated. So I'll stop there for now.
Great, thanks. What about you, Caleb?
I think to me, a pod is I guess similar to what you said, Michael, but the people that you have face-to-face contact with. And for me, that includes the people I live with. And then, if additional people that are in that circle of people that you see face-to-face, or maybe just have closer contact with. And I think, like Shelley, my pod situation has shifted quite a bit. When we had our last conversation about this, I was living in a different household, so with different people. And then I also had periods of time where I was part of a more formal pod, like with a whole other house. And I think my comfort levels have changed quite a bit with the pandemic and with new strains, and a lot that's up in the air, and feel the need to reduce my contact. So I am personally not seeing anybody outside of my household right now, but I'm part of some, I don't know how to word it, non-consensual pods, I suppose, at the moment, that other people have contact with, that, and we've had discussions about it, but I think my comfort levels have changed and other people's comfort levels have not. And I can talk more about this at a different time, but I'm moving out of my current living situation. So another change to that pod situation.
And that's really interesting because I think, part of what I've just heard here too, between like the two of you is that like, Shelley, it sounds like you've needed to kind of expand your pod because of maybe emotional needs. And Caleb, you're feeling the need to kind of restrict your pod also out of emotional needs. And it's like, as the pandemic has gotten, worse, not better, it's kind of like, what kind of factors are we weighing about our emotions and our physical safety and our emotional health and all of that? And it sounds like there's some potential for discussion there. And I'm curious what either of you might want to add to that, that thought process that you're having.
I could also add that I think, the pandemic itself is changing and like the situation is changing, but I think also people in different situations are finding different things that feel safe and feel comfortable. So not to say that everybody's in the same kind of situation where that everybody feels like they need to reduce contact. And I think in my personal life, I found ways like at work and going on walks and stuff that feel pretty safe, and that I can see myself doing that with people who are outside of my immediate pod. But yeah, I think it is that kind of difficult balance of course I want to see people, of course that would help my mental health, but also the stress and the anxiety of wondering who those people are in contact with. I think because of college life and not having a ton of trust and that people are only seeing a specific, very limited pod, I think that's one of the main reasons it's difficult for me to do that.
And Shelley, before you comment on that, I realized that we didn't start out tonight kind of acknowledging that we all make our own choices and we all have our own risk assessments or risk variables that we are willing to take. Sometimes we make those choices consciously, sometimes we don't. And I think part of our conversation today is to really help people think through, if you haven't thought through already, what is the informed consent of like what you're doing. And I think that, every time I have conversations about this, it's good for me to assess again too. So I don't think it's like that certain people need to assess this and other people don't, but I think part of harm reduction is really looking at what choices do we make, and is a risk an acceptable level of risk for us. So I want to be really clear that, I think anything that we're saying tonight is coming from our perspectives and where we feel comfortable with our risks or where we don't feel comfortable with our risks. And that might be really different for other folks. So it's kind of like a no judgment free zone, but I just want to make sure that folks know that. Shelley, do you want to talk about the kind of expansion versus the contraction and how that's meeting your needs?
Yeah, it's, I do sort of appreciate that we're revisiting this. You said 4 months. I wonder if it was even longer ago than that. It feels like it was a long time ago when we first had this conversation. But, it's interesting. My immediate sort of pod, as I said, is limited to like 2 partners that I have. And I haven't really felt the need to expand my pod much beyond that. And also like I'm fairly risk averse. And so I haven't really wanted to expand my pod a great deal. I also have a family member who is immune suppressed and somebody that I sometimes need to take care of or I'm called upon to help. And so I've tried to be really careful so that, if I need to be in that caretaking position, I can do that. So I've been pretty risk averse all along. And my pods or I guess we sometimes use the word bubble here in my circles. But so my pod or my bubble kind of expanded because of the needs of the other people in my pod. So I won't say that I'm part of like non-consensual pods because I've consented to, the expansion of other people's pods that I'm connected to. And there wasn't a whole lot of, you know, kind of weighing of pros and cons that I did at that point when we kind of changed what we were doing, because, you know, I was hearing from people who are important to me that they needed a change, and for their own like emotional well-being and mental health management, felt like they needed to slightly expand their circle of people that they have contact with. And you know, for me, these are people that I trust, and I feel like I'm willing to say I trust you. And so, you know, we've talked enough about how we feel about these things, that I trust your judgment, and trust that you're going to exercise good judgment. And, you know, if something happens that isn't what we agreed to, you go into somebody's house that's not part of the established circle, or you forget your mask, or, you know, whatever, like, let's just all really agree to communicate about that. So, you know, to me, it's been more of an exercise in just being really attentive to what I'm doing, even when I'm alone, and how that might affect other people who, you know, might be like 2 or 3 or even 4 kind of sets of people removed from me. And so, you know, I've come to be much more cognizant about my own behavior and the choices that I make. And there are times when I choose to say, like, oh, you know what, I mostly don't go in grocery stores, but I need a gallon of milk, even though I don't drink it. You know, and do I feel okay running in, you know, today, just given where everything is, you know, running into a store for a gallon of milk? And sometimes I do, and sometimes I don't. And sometimes that calculus is just the fact that I know that there are many more people who will potentially be exposed to something that I'm exposed to, even though I don't have direct contact with them in my immediate pod. So, so there's been a lot more communication and a lot more, I think, being attentive to how my choices may have like a ripple effect on other people.
That makes a lot of sense. And I love your phrase risk averse, because that's the phrase that I've been using a lot. And it's a phrase that I hadn't really used before. You had mentioned it a couple months ago. And, you know, I know, like, in my pod, it's my partner, and that's kind of my pod, and my dog and my cat, who just knocked over a whole bunch of stuff behind me. So sorry about the crash, but she stepped on something.
I missed it.
You know, it's Zoom life, and something fell down. So oops. But, you know, like, I know I shared this when we talked before, but, like, you know, we have a kid, and, you know, the kid is 26 years old, and, you know, he's not really good about wearing masks places. He is not risk averse. And it's partly just a, you know, matter of his maturity or his choices or whatever. And we've made a choice to see him, but he's not coming in our house. We're not going in his house. He's not getting in my car or anybody's car. You know, we've brought him like Thanksgiving dinner and Christmas dinner and stuff like that. And we've literally brought it to his house, put it outside, you know, I mean, like, he gets it from the outside. I mean, you know, it's not mean. And, you know, we talk outside. We've, you know, had 6 feet apart, and we've talked outside, but that's where I feel comfortable, is to say, okay, you know, he's higher risk. I mean, in terms of for me getting sick or for me getting him sick. And so we're going to mask up. He may or may not. We've tried to have little conversations, but, you know, that hasn't really gone very far. But he's the exception because he's family, even if he's playing by different rules than we're playing by. But we're finding a way to make that kind of, I was thinking, you know, Shelley, you talked about the Venn diagram. It's like, well, where is he on the Venn diagram? He's kind of outside the bubble, but he's kind of touching it. So, and that feels okay with me, at least.
Well, I'd be interested, like how that communication has gone, or how that has felt like within your family. I mean, I've had to have some pretty a few kind of serious conversations with, you know, somebody in my pod in particular, kind of saying, like, hey, you know, do you remember this is what we agreed to? You know, your behavior on this occasion is, you know, a little concerning, to me, and seems like it might be more, risk or more exposure than we agreed to, and figuring out how to come to a compromise where, we're kind of all in the same place has, it hasn't been easy. I mean, we've been able to do it by having really clear communication. So I kind of wonder how other people are experiencing those conversations.
Caleb, I have a short answer, so let me go first, and then I think you're going to have a longer answer than I will. I know for us, we have a good relationship with our kid, but he's our kid. He's feeling a lot of need. He lost his job. I mean, there's a lot of things that are going on for him. So, I have to admit that I feel like I've almost taken the cop-out way with him, that we haven't had like the discussion of like, well, when we're with you, you need to wear a mask. We haven't had that discussion because we've modified our behavior so that we're comfortable. Like, I'm immune compromised. My partner has medical conditions and is 10 years older than I am. I mean, like there's some things that we've got going on. So we are trying to protect ourselves in that way. And we've kind of told him that, but we haven't said, hey, we want you to do X, Y, or Z. So that's kind of how we've arranged it. It's like what we're doing feels safe enough. And we haven't had that conversation. And we haven't had it, I think, kind of on purpose. Like, do we really need to go there? Because we're not going to make changes anyway. So that's the short answer. Caleb, you're going to have a longer answer, I bet.
Maybe. It's just, I think, a little bit messier of a situation, maybe, but I think, we all have our certain degrees of complex situations. I think for me, I have asthma and I worry a lot. And so I worry about my own safety, and I have the sense that within the people I'm in contact with right now, which is going to change in the near future, I'm the one who's the most concerned and the one who's voicing that most often. And I spent a while talking to my parents and kind of troubleshooting, because we've had a lot of conversations together to make agreements about what feels safe. And I, in the past, have felt like I'm compromising on things that don't really feel safe, or at one point they did, and now the situation is different. So those agreements are mostly honored, sometimes not. But then I think I have to take into account like the pandemic is a lot worse than it was over the summer. And to me, that says we should probably reevaluate those things. And I kind of had this sense, and based on many conversations, that other folks are not willing to compromise to meet me where I need to be. And I am not willing to compromise my safety. So that has led me to decide to move out. But having those conversations, it's not been easy. But and even with good communication, I think, and a lot of respect for one another, it can really come down to, if you have just such different values that people aren't willing to budge, that maybe that pod doesn't work super well. And I know not everybody has an option to change who they're in contact with, or feel strongly about doing that. But that's kind of the situation I found myself in.
I think what you said is really important. That, it's kind of like we have to assess like continually like what's going on in the world and how we feel about it. And we might not be able to change it even if we're having good communications with people. And so sometimes we need to make a different choice. And I think that's something that I think that all three of us have talked about a little bit, is that, have we made different choices along the way? And how has that felt? And like you said, Caleb, like not everybody has the privilege or the ability to make different choices sometimes. I mean, sometimes we're put into positions that we can't just say, well, I'm going to move out. That's not always an option for people. So that challenges our pods, I think, sometimes if we have external factors that are going on. Do we want to shift? I was curious about some of the, do we have more than one pod, and what do we call it? Is it a bubble? Is it a pod? Or do they overlap? How do they overlap? How do the people down the road kind of affect what we've decided. Do y'all want to talk about that a little bit, about how that plays out for y'all?
Yeah, I can. I feel like I don't have the best language for this, so maybe somebody will suggest like a paradigm for this. I guess I would say I feel like I'm in, I think, like linking pods. So there are two people in my pods, and you know, they both have people or other parties that they felt a very strong need to be able to have more direct contact with. So like going in somebody's house and hanging out and watching a movie, or and maybe not wearing a mask. And so we had a lot of like the old game of telephone, like a lot of communication, or I was sort of a apex of communication at some point, where there was like a lot of like sort of individual conversations, and then kind of going back and talking to the various parties, and just kind of, you know, assessing, as Caleb said, like what are our individual perspectives first, and where are our, you know, what kind of values, like, I don't know if values is the right word, but what's our perspective and what's our approach to, you know, how we're dealing with this. And then what's our level of confidence with like the next tier of people out, you know, that folks are going to be engaging with. And, you know, do I trust, you know, my people in my pod enough to trust their judgment about, in some cases, people that I don't know. You know, in one case, people that I don't know. And I feel very, you know, I think my situation is different, obviously, than either of yours. And in particular, maybe Caleb's, like, I'm very close to the two people in my pod. And I do feel like I'm able to, you know, trust them with just about anything, and trust that they're going to be honest with me, and tell me if something isn't working the way we thought it was going to. But so I've completely lost my train of thought in this moment, I have to admit.
Pods, links.
Pods. Oh, the links. Yeah. So,
you know, not having good language for the,
Right. So I don't have good language for it. So I lose my train of thought thinking about it. But so, you know, the people in my pod are connected to other pods. And in one case, there's even like another level of pod that's connected to that. And, you know, I am a kind of risk averse person. And so like, you know, I don't want to say that I have discomfort, but I'm definitely aware of the fact that I've like exponentially grown my potential exposure, even though I don't see a lot of these people a lot. And so, you know, again, for me, I think it's really, you know, it is relying on the communication and the sort of reporting by the people in my pod about what they're doing. And somewhere there is a master calendar that somebody is keeping. You know, somebody is reporting to me, I'm reporting to somebody else. And at some point, this is all coming to a central person who is actually keeping track of like the exposures that we report outside our agreed upon pods. The idea being then that, you know, people can decide, like, maybe I don't want to go over, you know, to their house for the movie tonight. Maybe I'm going to wait 2 weeks because, you know, they did something that I don't feel comfortable with. That's not happening a lot because we've kind of all agreed to engage in, you know, similar behaviors and like not do things like be in public without masks and things like that. So, you know, there's a kind of almost a formal reporting structure to it. And all of those things give me, it's enough for me to have the like belief that I can rely on this system, even though I know that I definitely am increasing my exposure. And, you know, and I'll say, Caleb, like, I'm with you. You know, I've changed a lot of my personal habits in the past month or so, as we hear about the different strains, as we learn some different things about like the effectiveness of different kind of masks. And I'm taking personally and individually more precautions, I think, than I was, say, 6 months ago. So I'm not sure I answered your question, Michael.
No, I don't know that it was a directed question, and it went where it went. So I think that's, yeah, it's important. Caleb, do you have some other things that you'd like to add on to that or redirect from that?
Yeah, well, I really liked what you said, Shelley, about the kind of telephone line kind of communication where you're maybe not talking directly with some of those people, but you're hearing from others what those like agreements are and what people's exposures are. And you know, we're definitely in different situations, but in some ways, I think it's a little similar with because everybody has a different idea, I think, of what a pod means. So usually the situation I've run into is like in a given household of like my friends, the people that I know in Portland, not necessarily people I actually see, but they maybe have one or two people in their personal pod, but then their roommates have one or two people in each of their pods. And then each of those people lives probably with roommates, maybe has a partner, things like that. And it's really hard to know what those agreements are among those people and what kind of exposure they have. So I guess for me, that's the part where it kind of falls apart in terms of we can have the intention of being really safe, at least among the people I'm surrounded by, and still not be, I don't think, taking the precautions that we probably should be, in my opinion. But yeah, it's just very complicated. And I guess this is a separate response, but Michael, when you were asking about different pods and stuff, I was thinking of, I see people at work. I work with Forge and then I work at a library in person, and we all wear masks and do our best to stay 6 feet apart, but we're indoors. So we all know that there's potential exposure there. And another reason I think for me that I want to make sure on my end I'm being careful, because if I got sick, I could risk exposing everybody at work and people I come into contact with who I'm helping at the library. So that's kind of like my hopefully lower risk pod or circle or bubble that I think of. And then I also go on walks with my dog and see people in the park a lot of the time. And I think that's probably my lowest risk kind of exposure, where I wear a mask. Other people don't always wear a mask, but we're outside and we stay far apart. And I feel pretty comfortable with that. And I love talking to my neighbors and getting to see people. But I guess I kind of see myself having multiple circles that have different levels of exposure, and hopefully theoretically I'm not sharing much exposure at work or just with people out on the street, but there is potential risk there.
Yeah, I think that, you know, both of you just talked about things like, you know, like what's a pod and who's a pod and how do those kind of ripples go out, but also what's safe, because what's safe for me might not be safe for somebody else. Or, you know, and I think about like my brother who goes into Home Depot all the time and goes into grocery stores, and he wears a mask all the time and he's really careful and he's really smart. But, you know, he takes a lot more risk than I do. And so it's like, you know, I'm not saying that he's safer than I am or not safer, you know, but it's just, it's a different level of what we think of as safe. And I think, you know, when I was thinking about, you know, where are my pods, these aren't exactly pods, but like, you know, we walk our dog twice a day normally when it's not 6 inches of snow out. But we've made a choice as a partnership that we have not been wearing masks when we go for a walk because we're outside. And, you know, we're kind of like, that seems safe to me. But on the other hand, like every once in a while we see our neighbors and their dogs want to come over and get petted. Well, I don't have a mask on. Like, so are we like going to say, well, no, you can't come across the street because, you know, and how does that work? So, you know, like I've started to change behavior. We get a lot of our food delivered, all of our food delivered, and a lot of packages. And so now I've got a mask that I've hung on the doorknob of the front door so that I am prepared if I need to open the door. So I've thought about that with walking the dogs too. It's like, well, you know, should I be ready to be masked or should I be masking? And like Caleb, like what you said, I'm changing my opinions given that like the pandemic is changing. We've got different strains going on. And so I don't know, those are things that I think about a lot. I'm wondering if we could talk a little bit about how we're getting our basic needs met. And that could be why don't we talk about practical, like the physical needs, not physical like touch needs, but like, how do we get our groceries? Do we go to stores? What is our level of risk there? And, you know, I think you both mentioned a little bit about that. And how does that impact your pod's feelings of safety or trust?
I guess for me, it's really interesting to hear you both talk about this and like grocery stores and things like that. I go into grocery stores not a lot. I try not to go super frequently and wear a mask. And I also got some face shields that I have not worn yet, but like in addition to a mask. And it stresses me out a lot to go to the grocery store and get food because there are a lot of people. Sometimes they're not wearing masks properly or at all. And I try to really avoid them. But I do that because at least with my schedule and just needing to get things done in a specific order, I like sometimes struggle with food delivery and stuff and waiting a long time when I could have gone quickly or not having the right stuff that I really needed and not being able to like choose while I'm there. So like practically, I think it makes sense for me to go, and that's something that might change when like as more information comes out about this new strain. That's something I'm thinking about. If there are, you know, more recommendations of don't go to the grocery store because it's more likely to you're more likely to get sick doing that, then I think I've been kind of following the idea that it's time and contact with people that are both involved. So maybe passing somebody really quickly is less risky than having a face-to-face conversation for 10 minutes. But that's something I'm at the moment pretty comfortable with to get food. Yeah.
Cool. And I know, Shelley, you go to get milk, so
So I actually ran into a store and bought milk today. So milk is top of mind, but milk is only for coffee. So let's be clear.
Got it. How are you doing those basic needs?
Yeah, it sounds like I'm maybe a little more similar to Caleb than like what you've described, Michael, of having you know, very little kind of contact in public places. I have tried to like do online ordering, and I'm, you know, very aware of the fact that, you know, that sort of access is not, you know, available to everybody. I try not to like pay to have my food delivered, but there are definitely times I've done that. For various reasons. But I have tried, I'm kind of with Caleb on the time and contact kind of matrix. So, you know, if I'm gonna do like my weekly grocery shopping, I'm tending to order online and then do the thing where you just sit in the parking lot and, you know, somebody from the store brings it out to your car. You know, so you're really lowering the amount of time you're spending in a store. But I am going into stores when I when I feel like I need to, or, you know, there are certain things that just might require, you know, going into a retail place or a place of business, some prescription medications, for instance. So, you know, partner of mine and me, like we both have some prescriptions we have to pick up in person. And so like, I'll take that opportunity to go into Walgreens and buy, you know, whatever cleaning supplies they have left on the shelf and as much toilet paper as I can. But I'm definitely aware that I'm really limiting all of that. I mean, I don't just jump out of the car and go into a store whenever I feel like it, or run inside and get a cup of coffee from the coffee shop. And, you know, some of those things I miss, some of those things I don't really miss. I have a fairly high tolerance for being inside places as long as I'm not in there for a real long time. And I'm definitely with Caleb on the, I mean, I will say it is stressful. I feel stressed and I feel anxiety when I go into, especially a large store like a grocery store. And I mean, I've, you know, seen exactly what Caleb is describing, and I have a little difficulty understanding how this happens, but I actually saw somebody walk into a store today, just no mask anywhere, like not even hanging off their chin. And I'm just sort of like, how is this happening? And again, I mean, if people don't want to wear masks, fine. But I think, you know, in a retail setting, you know, we know that means that there's going to potentially be some exposures. So, you know, it is stressful, and I've, you know, the trade-off of having to like wait or plan ahead, you know, to order something online, often feels worth it these days to like avoid that stress and anxiety for me. And then, you know, this is a hard thing within my pod because I'm in the middle of like two people, one who is very risk averse and like will not go into a store or a public place unless they absolutely have to. And another person who, you know, goes and does grocery shopping on an almost daily basis. And I have direct, you know, contact with both of those people. And so it's, you know, there's somebody who's engaging in behaviors that feel a little too high risk for me directly. And yet I'm exposing myself to that person who is engaging in those behaviors. And as we sit and talk about this, I'm sort of becoming a little more aware of the dissonance there. So I, you know, and I don't know that I can make great sense of that. I mean, I do think my instinct is to think what I expose myself to directly is my primary concern. And, you know, it may just be convenient to say, well, I trust that this person's doing what they need to do and is wearing the right kind of mask and being careful when they're going into a store. But that's where I've just sort of come out, I guess, in that sort of analysis, that I'm going to trust the people around me, that they know what I'm like, where my lines are, you know, ultimately, and that we're kind of all in a similar enough space in terms of our, you know, our risk and our exposure that we're comfortable.
And it's really hard too, like, you know, if you trust the people that you're, you know, in your close circle, that's really great. And it's like, if you have, not you personally, Shelley, but like if we started to think about like the nuances, sometimes we would make ourselves, you know, kind of crazy if we sat and thought about all of the little nuance, you know, all of the details of, well, who did this and did they do that? And were they with somebody that walked into the grocery store without a mask? Or did I walk past them? Was I, you know, I mean, like, and I think all of us, well, maybe not all of us, but many of us have those thoughts. But if we spent all of our time thinking about that, we might kind of go off the edge emotionally. So it's kind of like, well, how much time do we want to invest in thinking about what everybody is doing that we're having contact with, and how much do we need to try to let that go so that we can function, you know, ourselves. So you know, it's interesting too, because I was thinking about, you both have different approaches to your daily kind of needs meeting your needs. And, you know, we made a decision early on. My dog is going to bark and say hello to everybody. But like, you know, I signed up for subscriptions to Shipt and Instacart, which now I'm not wanting to do because of their union stuff, but, and to DoorDash. And so we're not paying for shipping. So like, you know, Shelley said you didn't want to pay for shipping. Well, I guess I'm paying for it by a year-long membership, but like that was a decision that was made in like April or May of last year, and it's really paid off. And on the other hand, you know, I've really been thinking about, it's expensive. I mean, there's a markup with ordering online and having it delivered. And, you know, I feel very blessed or fortunate that that's something that I can do, that's within my realm of possibilities. But I've also started to think, well, is this really the way I want to be spending my money? So like we've recently started, we joined Imperfect Foods, which is just fantastic. You know, and it's like, it's cheaper than buying at the grocery store. And I feel it's kind of like it's offsetting the price of getting other food delivered from the grocery store, because now I'm buying this other thing that's a little bit cheaper. Or the other day was the first time I think in like 8 months where I went and I picked up food sitting in the car at the grocery store. So I ordered ahead of time and I opened the trunk and you know, that was kind of cool. And, you know, it was the benefit of like, I got the discounts from the grocery store that I don't get when I buy online and have it delivered. So, you know, I mean, cost becomes an issue, I think, for all of us at some point, no matter what our means are. So, you know, like Caleb, that sometimes it's just easier just to go into the grocery store and get it. And it saves you physical time of having to like, not having to wait for things. So again, all of those balances. Other thing to add on that kind of physical, how do we keep our physical environments, like our refrigerator stocked and toilet paper in the shelves? Any other comments on that?
Well, just hearing what you were saying, Michael, I wonder if I could add maybe another factor that might play into that kind of decision making, at least for me, has been knowing that other people that I'm in contact with, and maybe similar to Shelley, are going into grocery stores regularly, are going to other kinds of stores regularly, and have different exposure at work and stuff, and having this kind of sense. And I know logically that any additional exposure is risky, but to choose for myself to do things that are more inconvenient is hard when I know that I'm kind of already getting the grocery store exposure. And that's not completely logical, I think, but it is part of my decision making. And I'm looking forward to being on my own and deciding for myself, you know, maybe I will switch to more so food delivery, just because I know that then I'm really not getting that grocery store exposure, things like that, where I really will have more autonomy, I think, and feeling out what actually feels safe personally. But yeah, I think, at least for me, taking into account what other people are doing plays into that a little bit.
Shelley, anything else on your physical environment and how that plays a role in your pods?
No, you know, the only thing I'll add, it's really neither here nor there, but just in thinking about how I'm meeting my needs and how the people around me are meeting their kind of physical basic needs. I have noted that I'm experiencing a lot more offers of assistance or I guess cooperation amongst the people in my pod and in my kind of secondary pods. So, you know, there's a lot of somebody's going to the grocery store. And I know, you know, you've been trying to find this water you like and you can't find it. And, you know, do you want me to look for it? Or, you know, buying things for, you know, parents or older folks to maybe help them stay out of grocery stores or limit their exposures. I'm seeing a lot more kind of, you know, reciprocity and like offers of assistance and helping kind of in my social circle, which is nice. And, you know, I think is a way to feel some connection and some closeness in this very awkward situation that, you know, we were still in, have been in for a really long time. And maybe that's just a comment about how desperate I'm, you know, feeling for social connection, that somebody offering to buy me something from the grocery store feels really good and special. But it's definitely something that I've noticed, and it does make a difference.
It's funny, Shelley, because you know that you went and looked for Lysol wipes for us. It's like, it was like, oh, we're coworkers, but like, oh, you found like Lysol wipes, and I'm so happy. So, but you know, it's like, I think that you know, there are those things that really feel like, oh, like somebody's thinking about you, and you know, I mean, I have contact with you every day, Shelley, but like that was like, it just felt nice and special, and it's like we're looking out for each other. And I don't know, I mean, I think there's that piece of that looking out for, and there's also, it's like, well, I feel a lot of my needs met because, like, you know, oh, Jared is shopping for me through Shipped today, and it's like, well, I've had him shop for us before, and like I feel this special connection. And you know, like I asked if he would buy flowers for my partner one time, and he was like, oh, of course I will. Well, does this one look good? And so, like, you know, he sent me pictures of the flowers, and it's like, I mean, it's kind of silly, but like I felt like a human connection. I mean, I'm usually happy being all by myself and not caring about like that connection. But like, I think because we've gone so long without day-to-day normal interactions, like passing each other on the street, I mean, I have friends with my shoppers, you know, and it's crazy, but it feels good sometimes to just know that it's the same person. And yeah. Nice. Should we talk a little bit about emotional needs? We don't have to go till 8 o'clock, but you know, I'm curious. We've kind of touched on it a little bit. But what are our emotional needs, and how are they getting met or not met within our current world, and how we've structured each of our worlds?
I mean, I can just start off. I think my answer is actually sort of short, which may be shocking, but you know, my pod is small, and I'm a little bit of an introvert myself anyway. So I think it was clear to me early on that I was not experiencing the social isolation in the same way that a lot of my friends were, and a lot of other people are, who I think feel a very strong desire to have a lot more social interaction than I do. That said, I mean, this is wearing on me, you know, certainly at this point as well. And I think I've said this before in prior sessions. I have always really liked talking on the phone, which seems to be kind of falling out of favor. And Michael knows I can talk for a long time on the phone. But I really have always liked having long phone conversations. And so that is a way that feels very intimate to me, you know, much more than like chatting through writing, or maybe not more than like video calling, but certainly more than writing. Because I think you kind of have to really be present. Like there's only one mode of communication happening, and it's, you know, voice and hearing. And so that's something that I've done a lot of and a lot more of during the pandemic, as a way to feel like I, you know, can still hear from and connect to people. But that's about all I have to offer.
What about you, Caleb?
I think I'm usually balancing between, or trying to balance between, a need for safety and a need for connection. In this moment, in my current situation, that need for safety is not totally met. So I'm, you know, doing what I think will help to meet that need. But then that decreases my level of connection to other people. But I've also been finding that there are ways that I can be connected with people that feel safe. I have a friend that I had like seen before around campus, but we only started talking and communicating when we had a Zoom class together. and we've not ever hung out in person during the pandemic, but we still chat, and hopefully we've talked about spending time together in the future, hopefully near future, post pandemic maybe, or if things change with vaccines. I have other people I do little Netflix parties with, watching shows together, or listening to music. We do like Spotify parties, to listen to music together, and then talking with my family too. So those, I feel like the safety and the connection are kind of, I have to go in an inverse way, at least for me sometimes, but I think they're creative ways that I'm finding to meet both of those needs, hopefully.
That's really cool. And I am so incredibly introverted that, at the beginning of this pandemic, it was like, oh, this is really cool. Like, not the pandemic part, but I am totally happy being, at home, not going out in public. And I'm still pretty good with that. Like, I'm still very good with that. I miss doing parts of my work that meant traveling. Like, I really miss getting on a plane. I don't miss the hassle of the airports, but I miss going places. But otherwise, I'm pretty darn good in my own environment. And at the same time, we used to eat out a lot. We used to, and again, they were my friends, the wait staff were my friends, because like, I don't have a life, but like, I miss having that, what some people would call superficial, but like, I knew their names and they knew mine. And it felt like a good, like, for an introvert, it felt like a good level of connection. And I haven't been in a restaurant for, I don't know, 9 or 10 months or whatever it is now. And I don't think that that's going to change anytime in the near future. I haven't gotten coffee from anywhere. I mean, there's, all of that. And I don't think that's going to change. And I think I am starting to feel some of the emotional tug of like not having direct contact. And then I'm also starting to fear this thing of like, well, am I going to know what I'm supposed to do if I go into a grocery store? Like, did the rules change and I haven't been part of it? So like, I don't, like, maybe I'm not going to know what the social engagement process is. So like, I'm trying to like manage my emotions around that, which is just bizarre because it's projecting, into the future. But I do feel a lot of emotional need that I can't even identify what it is, but it's definitely starting to drain. And it's not because, I love my partner. We have a really good relationship and I like being alone and all of those things. And I'm starting to feel the weight of it. And I'm hoping that changes we have a new administration, which gives me a little bit of hope. So I'm hoping that some of that will counteract my negative emotions. Why don't we kind of wrap up with what nourishes you about your choices, your current choices? What decisions are you really happy with? What feels good about what you're doing or not doing, is like whichever way you want to look at it.
I can share. This isn't something we've talked about today, but I made a choice during the pandemic to adopt a dog. And a lot of you know that and how that's gone, but that's just been such a great decision for me, even though it's been challenging in a lot of ways and changes the way I go about my life. But it's also like, I always have somebody to hang out with and to, connect with and spend time with. And it's not the same as being with people, but especially going into, changing where I live and my kind of living situation, knowing that I'll have somebody with me during that is really nice.
And you have a snuggle bud, so
yes.
Which is nice, which is really cool. Yeah. And Shelley, what about you? What are some of the kind of the perks or the positives or the things that you feel good about?
I think, that's, I feel hard pressed to like come up with an answer to that question, but I guess I would say, I feel like I have the luxury and the privilege of being pretty intentional for the most part about what I do, and I have ability to, control my exposure and my interactions with others for the most part. And I guess I feel good that, I and the people in my pod are, I think, not only taking care of ourselves individually, but are sort of committed to this kind of process of taking care of each other, by both thinking about what we do individually and how that affects each other. But also, I think just being in some ways, more attentive to each other. I think, knowing that this is, our circle is very small. And so my sense is that there's been both some intentional and also some unintentional, or maybe unspoken kind of extra attentiveness or caretaking that's been going on. And so I feel really lucky, that I have that, I guess.
I think like you said, Shelley, that I mean, I feel really lucky too that, my partner and I agree with like what our behaviors are. We haven't had any conflict about that. At least I don't think we have. We haven't voiced any conflict with it. So I think that it's really nice to be able to have, my little tiny pod be, in consensus. And I also feel like we're kind of counterbalancing some of the folks that are taking a lot more risks. Not that it works this way in reality, but it's like, am I minimizing risks? Are people, in my world, minimizing risks more so than some people that are either having to take more risks because they just have to because of where they work or what they need to do to survive, or because they're making a choice to be a little bit more risky. So it feels good to me to try to, at least not add to the pandemic or the contagion by doing what we're doing. So that feels good to me. And I am hopeful about our science-based administration and what may happen with that, so that we don't all have to live in pods and we can live a little bit more freely in the future. Yeah. Do either of you have things that you'd like to share to wrap up with tonight? And as you're thinking about that, if any of our participants have thoughts that you'd like to add to the chat, that'd be great too.
I've just appreciated hearing how both of you are navigating the pandemic and pods. I think sometimes it can feel isolating to be, well, obviously it's isolating to be in the pandemic, but then also dealing with difficult situations and feeling like sometimes you're alone in that. But I think a lot of us are confronting similar things and having to find different solutions to them. So yeah, I've just really appreciated hearing from both of you.
Shelley, any thoughts?
Yeah, I don't know that I have any additional thoughts, but I do as well appreciate hearing what, how other people are navigating this. I mean, it's a very unique situation, and certainly we are, I do want to acknowledge that and I think we've acknowledged this, but I mean, I'm very cognizant of the fact that, we are three people who are, have varying degrees, but, a substantial amount of control over a lot of these, factors in our lives. And I think, the conversation is very different for lots and lots of other people. But, to the extent that we're able to make these choices and do some of these things intentionally, it is helpful. It's like affirming, I guess, sort of, even to, if folks are doing things that are different, to just hear about other people's thought processes and, how we balance risk and the benefits of, maybe increasing our risk of exposure. So thank you.
And I too have really valued having these conversations and having them in a way that's going to be shared, beyond tonight, because I will edit this and we'll probably put it up if it's not too boring. I don't think it's boring, but I agree, Shelley, like we are kind of privileged in that, I mean, I know Caleb, you do some work that's outside of your home, but like with Forge work, we can all work at home. We can all do some things that we can really be as protected as we want to be with our work, other than, you know, I mean, like what you all talked about those other people that are coming into your worlds. But, you know, there is some privilege in some of where each of the three of us are. And I think that, you know, what's beautiful about having this conversation for me tonight is that I know that not everybody else thinks about if they have a pod or a bubble, and they just move on with living, and that's great if that feels comfortable to them. But it's really nice for us to be able to share our three different perspectives, which are very different. And you know, I hope that it stimulates people to talk about what their experiences are. And again, like we talked about in the beginning, there's no right or wrong. There's no judgment about what people are doing, and we all make our own choices. But I'm glad that we could have the discussion, and hopefully that will stimulate other people to have that discussion, or for us all to continue to have that discussion with other people beyond tonight. So I really appreciate both of you being willing to share personal things with everybody, and that's really useful, I think. And as we wrap up, I'm wondering if we could do a closing question in the chat. And before we do the question, just a reminder that February 9th, we're going to do kind of a Valentine's Day making party chat. We will send you good stuff to play with if you'd like to make Valentine's. And if you don't have anybody to send it to, you can send it, you know, anonymously to your senator or wherever. You can send one to yourself. So please join us and make something. I mean, you can tape it to your window or your mirror if that makes you feel good and sends a little love your way. Can we close with a question of what is one new idea or thought that you had during tonight's conversation? So what's something new, a new thought that you might have had tonight? And that might have been a hard question. So Larry's writing, I need to find out what Discord is. I'm reminded of those little interactions with people at restaurants that I miss. Probably the main reason overall I keep my current pod, I'm an introvert, but too much introversion really goes south. Yep. Yeah, lots of things. So I encourage you all to think about what you might have heard tonight, what you may want to have a discussion with people in your world about. Hal's writing, it might be beneficial to rethink my own pod and discuss safe ways to meet up with people I miss. Yep, exactly. Yeah. Well, I appreciate everybody being here tonight, and I hope to see everybody on February 9th. And we will have a good time where we can all see each other. We'll all be able to be on camera if you'd like to be, and we'll make some Valentines. It'll be fun. Thank you to our interpreters too for being fab, like always. Good night, everybody.